full 4 copies Jeskai Ascendancy and cards like Anticipates and Disdainful Strokes in the main deck, definitely taking a more controlling approach on the archetype.
And I think that as like you're seeing both players here with some main deck inclusions to try to fight Esper Dragons. In James Gerner's list, you're seeing 3 main deck copies of Disdainful Stroke, and in Josh Bauer's Teamer deck, 3 main deck copies of Teamer Charm alongside the 3 copies of Stubborn Denial. 3 mana for Mana Leak is not a horrible deal against Esper Dragons when they're trying to tap out for powerful 5, 6, 7 mana plays.
Yeah, so Josh is going to be on a 6-card hand for this game. Now, both these players have 2 losses and a draw. So both still live for top 8. 2 wins should get them in. It's possible that the loser of this game match can still top 8, but he'll definitely need things to break his way.
Yeah, we'll need a lot of luck to make the top 8, but the winner should be in great shape.
Both players trading lands to be in the game. It's a Mountain for Josh and a Battlefield Forge for James. Yeah, my coast will lead into Heir of the Wilds for Josh.
And Josh making it very clear what his deck is up to, with the Teamer mana available and a ferocious creature in play.
Yeah, Heir of the Wilds is one of those. It's been an interesting card in the deck. It is probably one of the best 2-drops for Teamer, and maybe one of the weaker parts of the Teamer archetype in that it is not a particularly powerful card, but kind of a necessity for the Teamer deck.
It helps a lot against the Abzan aggro kind of matchups. And you just need to start casting stuff earlier in the game. Take advantage of your other beaters.
He attacks with Heir of the Wilds. James attempts to raise an alarm to block it, but Teamer Charm will Mana Leak that spell, so it'll be countered. Heir will swing in for 2. Both players taking some incidental damage off their lands here, by the way. You see both of James's lands are pain lands. The Yavimaya Coast has been tapped for green twice as well on Josh's side.
The much maligned Teamer Charm, doing what it does.
Yeah, traded. Now, if he's going to make that play, it is, no, it's the same both ways.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually get yep.
He can let it block and then fight, but this way he gets the 2 points of damage across by just counting it outright.
Jeskai Ascendancy is the turn 3 play for James Gerner. So he does have that on turn 3, but of note, he has 3 pain lands. So he paid 3 life for Jeskai Ascendancy there. And that could really hurt him as Josh's play is Savage Knuckleblade, Haste, Attack for 7.
And that's really important for Josh because with James playing Jeskai Ascendancy, he has the long-term advantage big time. Josh needs to close out this game quickly, and Savage Knuckleblade, being a haste threat, pumping up Heir of the Wilds, trying to close this game out as quickly as possible before Jeskai Ascendancy overwhelms Josh.
And how much of the story has just been the lands that James has? He's taking too much damage to stabilize.
Yeah, 4 damage so far just off of lands, 1 from Raise the Alarm and 3 from the Ascendancy. And I don't actually know if he can interact with the board effectively. His hand appears to be cards like Stoke the Flames, Anticipate, Disdainful Stroke. He may not be able to interact with the board this turn, and he is facing lethal.
And he has an Anticipate in hand, so he can anticipate and loot. Perhaps if he finds a card like Wild Slash. But that doesn't work. Savage Knuckleblade can pump.
Exactly. Even if he finds Wild Slash, there's still lethal coming across.
I don't know if he has a draw here. He may just be dead on the board. Interesting spot to be this early. And here's a swing. It's for 7 from Josh.
Yeah, I just don't think there's an out here. I mean, James has to cast something. And if he casts something, he's going to take damage, and then Savage Knuckleblade can finish it off.
He'll cast Anticipate, go to 6. Here's the Jeskai Ascendancy trigger.
And Josh is not even going to let it have it with a Stubborn Denial there, and that wraps up a very fast first game.
So game 1 in Teamer midrange, and goes over to Josh Bauer.
The Jeskai tokens can be a little bit clunky, and it's very important to capitalize on the turns they take off to cast Jeskai Ascendancy. Josh had the perfect play there with Savage Knuckleblade, and James just did not have an opportunity to play the cards in the hand. Plenty of powerful stuff going on, but just no time.
Win puts Josh a little bit closer to the top 8 here in our standard open. If you're looking to play in one of the StarCityGames.com opens, we now have the rest of our events for the year announced. We are in quarter 2, but we now have our quarter 3 season. That starts with our Modern Grand Prix in Charlotte. We've told you about that one this weekend, and we'll tell you more about it. But we do make some trips across the Midwest. That's going to be a standard open in Indianapolis in June, going to Bald Standard in Baltimore, and for the first time in mid-July, we are going to be headed toward the great city of Chicago. as we go through Season 3. This one's a longer one. We then go back over east.
Yeah, we head to Richmond, then a Legacy Open in Washington, D.C. Then we go even further east for a Standard Grand Prix in London, a Modern Open Series in Charlotte after that, and then after that, the Season 3 Invitational in New Jersey. Standard and Legacy has the Invitational formats with a 2-day, $20,000 Standard Open Series event, beginning of August, the 28th through 30th.
Yeah, for those of you playing in IQs at home, remember we are alternating our Invitationals this year. Some of them will be a mix of Standard and Legacy, whereas some will be a mix of Standard and Modern. So depending on which of those formats you want to play, you can plan your schedule accordingly.
Yep. It will always be half Standard and then half one of the older formats.
Yeah. A change I'm a really big fan of. I know, especially for players who've gotten into the game more recently, not all of them own Legacy decks or get the chance to play Legacy that often. So both our Season 2 Invitational, which we're leading up toward now in Columbus, and the one at the end of the year, which will be here in the Northwest, both those will feature Modern as one of their formats.
I'm also just a big fan of showcasing all the constructed formats. I really like that change to 2015, where we now have Modern on camera alongside Legacy and Standard. So the more different formats we can highlight, the fresher the coverage is, and I personally enjoy it a lot.
All right. So going to the team mid-range deck, we haven't seen this one yet on camera. One of the things that really impresses me about it is how much haste is in the deck. It can be very difficult for Jeskai tokens to deal with. They oftentimes have removal spells, but still take damage while they're killing creatures, whether they're Thunderbreak, Regents, Savage, Knuckleblades. Knuckleblade is really hard for the deck to deal with just by itself.
Yeah, I mean, there's Stoke the Flames, and that's a reasonable answer if he has it on time, though that's hard to do without at least taking one shot. But it sneaks underneath Disdainful Stroke. It's really hard to block with almost any creature in the deck. The tokens don't do very much to affect it. That's only a temporary solution. So it is a problematic card for Jeskai tokens.
So we look at the sideboard from James Gerner. We have copies of Anger of the Gods, Dragonlord Ojutai, End Hostilities, Negate, Glare of Heresy, Elspeth Sun's Champion, Disdainful Stroke, and then an interesting one in Ojutai Exemplars. How do those help him fight this matchup?
I think that he's going to bring in the Ojutai Exemplars alongside Dragonlord Ojutai and the End Hostilities and just try to convert into a control deck. You saw if he tries to damage race with Josh, that's not going to be a very good matchup for him most of the time. I think he really wants to settle into a control role here.
Yeah, Ojutai Exemplar is a pretty interesting card here. If he can't kill spell the team or creatures, perhaps he can just make something that can block them. And Exemplars is a great card that can do that.
Especially if he's has access to other late game effects like Elspeth Sun's Champion. He has a copy of it in his sideboard, and the Dragonlord Ojutai. So I think James would be well served here by just trying to slow down the deck a little bit, become more of a control deck.
All right, over in the sideboard options for Josh Bower, this does seem like a matchup he wants to be playing, first of all.
Looked really good game one. He's got a Rending Volley, a Shamanic Revelation, a Kiora, the Crashing Wave, a Sorok Dragonclaw, a Stubborn Denial, 2 copies of Disdainful Stroke, 2 copies of Encased Ice, 2 copies of Destructive Revelry, 2 Feed the Clan, 2 Anger of the Gods. You can see Anger of the Gods coming in this matchup. It is a little bit risky if James converts into a control deck, but against the game one build of the deck, at least it looks pretty good. I think the additional copy of Stubborn Denial is likely to come in this matchup. James, of course, playing with a bunch of spells. And he has access to Destructive Revelry if he wants to fight over the fight over Jeskai's Ascendancy itself.
I don't actually expect him to change too much, though. Stubborn Denial seems good as a counterspell. Sorok Dragonclaw is a decent threat in the matchup, but there's not... He's pretty well set up in the main deck for this.
Yeah, I feel with Summer Denial and Teamer Charm, he has the ability to keep James off of a lot of his high-impact plays, and Josh's curve is just a lot smoother than James, who was very glutted with expensive cards there in Game 1 and just couldn't deploy his hand in time.
We'll see if James can get on the advantage for Game 2. He's down a game, but he'll get to be on the play for Game 2. And one thing, we said Jeskai, that deck that you mentioned at one point in the metagame was the deck to beat, really has fallen off here. Only 3 copies of Jeskai making it into Day 2 out of 109, so really has fallen off that Tier 1 perch. And a lot of times, when I watch it play, you see games like this where, to be honest, the deck just seems slow.
Yeah, the problem with the deck, in my opinion, is there's just a lot going on at 3 mana. That's why you see in some of the decks include cards like Dragon Fodder, even though it is, on the surface, seemingly a lot worse than Raise the Alarm. It's just to lower the curve of the deck. And Anticipate kind of helps towards that end, but also doesn't really because it's not impacting the board. Yeah. It's just something to do on the second turn.
Anticipate's a great card in the deck, but if the criticism is that the deck is slow, Anticipate's not a very fast Magic card.
Yeah.
So a lot of concern there. You don't see those games where you just go off with Jeskai Ascendancy nearly as often. A lot of people can blow up your enchantment or simply kill you before you get it going. You saw James had Jeskai Ascendancy there, but no time to win the game.
A lot more copies of Bile Blight floating around the metagame than maybe there was a month or so ago. And Dromoka's command is a huge problem for this deck. In fact, James has gotten away mostly from creatures, and I would imagine part of the response of that is you increase your vulnerability to Dromoka's command even greater when you're playing threats like Goblin Rabblemaster alongside Jeskai Ascendancy. The card just does too much. So James is basically just on an all-token strategy, in some part to blunt the impact of that card, I'm sure.
Yeah, Josh going down to 6. He was on 6 last game, but that hardly mattered. He was able to kill James before James was able to cast the cards in his hand.
Yep. I mean, James had a clunky draw there, though not an abnormally clunky draw. He had Raise the Alarm on turn 2 and Ascendancy on turn 3.
Yeah.
A lot of pain lands were in the mix, and just didn't have an opportunity to be able to cast the Treasure Cruises or even the Stoke the Flame that was in his hand.
There are just a lot of moving pieces here. If you're paying 4 mana for Stoke the Flames, it looks a lot less impressive. You see that the decks that are playing Stoke the Flames really have just gotten more and more aggressive.
It's the best way to capitalize on that card.
And Josh keeping on 6. So we are into game 2. James starting to play this time on a temple. He's not going to be on all pain lands this game. Scries to the bottom. So he does have a Hordling Outburst to build his way up to. Both players trade temples. James, I'm not sure his mana is exactly where he wants it to be. He's going to have a turn 2 Seeker of the Way, but double Treasure Cruise in hand, Hordling Outburst.
I do not believe he has blue mana.
Yeah, I don't think
or a third land.
Or a third land. Radical Mystic is a play for Josh, and one thing the Teamer deck does well is it's pretty consistent here. He'll start making threats as early as this next turn. James offers Seeker for Radical Mystic, but way too many instants for Josh to accept that trade.
Well, most of the instances that James can have in that spot are just direct damage spells that could kill the Radical Mystic anyway.
Yeah, Raise the Alarm would be the one he really wouldn't want to see.
Yeah, Raise the Alarm, and I think Josh just values his Radical Mystic very highly. I mean, he wants to get out in front of James before James can really capitalize with his more expensive, more powerful spells.
So it looks like James did hit the land he wanted that turn. It was Mystic Monastery, so it'll come into play tapped, but it'll fix all his colors. Swings for 2 and passes. He does have one card he can play this turn. That's a copy of Valorous Stance in his hand. And if Josh plays a large creature here, James will get to use that mana and stay on pace. We'll see. Josh tap fetching, and he'll go for Thunderbreak Regent.
And this curve works out very nicely for James, who has the ability to Valorous Stance this Thunderbreak Regent now, untap and play Hordling Outburst, hit for 3, really develop his board.
Yeah, James takes 3, but that's not much of a concern here. So Thunderbreak hits the graveyard. For James, he draws land number 4. It's going to be a basic island, but then goes ahead and plays Hordling Outburst, gets 3 goblins. Prowess is the Seeker of the Way, so it'll become a 3/3 lifelink. Hit Josh down to 14 and heal James all the way back up to 20.
Just a great set of turns there from James, breaking serve with the Valorous Stance and then really applying some pressure this turn.
Yeah, it was really important to think that Josh played a card there that could trade with Valorous Stance.
Yeah, if Josh makes James burn off the 2 mana there, then James' opening there is a lot less impressive.
Something like Yasova Dragonclaw would have been more difficult for James.
Yeah.
Frontier Bivouac for Josh. It's his own tri-land, so it comes into play tapped. He's at 14, now on the back foot. When Jeskai Tokens gets out in front, it can be pretty threatening. A lot of its cards get really increase in power level.
Now, I don't know if James really has a follow-up left in his hand. I think it's just a couple copies of Treasure Cruise.
Well, Stoke will help. So Josh's turn was Knuckleblade, Haste, Attack. Those 3 goblins plus the island meant that James could stoke the flames down the Knuckleblade. So Josh cost him his whole turn and his tapped creature.
Fortunately for Josh, no follow-up here from James. Drew land that came into play tap, so he can't cast Treasure Cruise this turn. And most likely next turn has to spend his entire turn to cast if he wants to do that. So Josh may have a couple turns here to try to recover.
Down to 9, though. That swing was for 5, 3 goblins and a Seeker. How can Josh recover? He does have an opening, as you mentioned. James isn't going to be doing much. He's not going to be putting much on the board in these next couple turns. Josh will play a Morph, pass the turn. That's a win for the Jeskai player. Of all the things he could have done, that seems less threatening. You know, Stormbreath Dragon could have happened.
I mean, even if it's a potent Morph, it's still not even very good for Josh.
Yeah, and I believe it's just a Radical Mystic.
Yeah.
Oh, here's going to be the Treasure Cruise. James is reloading. Is it going to work? And it will. Seeker of the Way, Prowess up to a 3/3.
Yeah, there could have been a lot of bad things there. Stubborn Denial would have been really rough. A Stratus Dancer down there would have been really bad, but James had nothing else to do that turn, so he's just got to kind of risk it.
The card's drawn. Another Seeker of the Way, a Fetch Land, and Secure the Wastes. Pretty fine 3 for James. He'll now get to keep making land drops and build up toward that large secure. And the team will come in again. He's willing to trade away a goblin just for some damage. So Seeker's a 3/3, accompanied by 3 goblins with Josh at 9. I really like this attack.
Yeah, this looks like a really nice attack. This is also an attack that's somewhat risky if the morph down there is Den Protector, because Josh gets a trading, gets to get something back, but James is just trying to finish off the game at this point.
Yeah, and as we know, there are no Den Protectors or Death Mist Raptors in this Teamer deck.
It's just Rattleclaw Mystic.
And Josh blocks, takes 5, goes down to 4. And he'll flip Rattleclaw Mystic, making mana. So he does get to ramp this turn, and it will be Sarkhan Unbroken. The new Planeswalker from Dragons of Tarkir. A powerful card in his deck, but he's fairly far behind, and at 4, he is definitely not safe. Jeskai plays cards like Stoke the Flames.
I mean, if he's going to stabilize, it's going to be through the Planeswalker. It's got to be like this.
Yeah, he doesn't have life gain on his side.
If James's hand is clunky, there's a chance that he can't tender much of an attack this turn, and Josh gets an opportunity to pull it back around. But it's asking a lot. James has looked at a lot of cards last turn via Treasure Cruise. And
so if you're playing Jeskai and you see face down morphs, do you think he might have a Den Protector Death Mist package? Because if you're doing that, cards like Heir of the Wilds become so, like you've seen Heir of the Wilds, does that mean you don't think he plays those?
I think it's unlikely, but you can never completely rule it out.
And with Josh tapped down, James gets a real good opportunity here to just resolve Elspeth Sun's champion. I think that's what he's going to go for.
Yep. I mean, both plussing and minusing this turn are pretty powerful. I think my preference is slightly towards the side of minusing, as you get to unleash a pretty big attack here and put Josh close to the ropes.
And if he gets that blocker off the battlefield, then he's going to force Josh into some bad plays. So here's Sun's champion.
If James goes ahead and plays Elspeth and pluses, then he can't even really attack this turn. I suppose he can still attack. It's just a lot worse.
We'll see which one James Gerner goes for. It's going to be -3. Destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. That will be the dragon token, so it's gone. Seek of the Way prowesses into a 3/3. He has that 3/3 and 2 1/1 tokens. All of Josh's blocks will cost him creatures. Now James attacks. We can see if they're going at James or at Sarkhan. I like this. It looks like James is going to leave back 1 goblin to protect Elspeth. And he's swinging enough to still make it lethal.
I think Josh just has to fall to 1 here and try to go into next turn with Sarkhan. Unless he has some big trump, and then he can just double chump block and do whatever he's going to do. But he needs to be able to threaten Elspeth next turn.
One Rattleclaw jumps in front of Seeker of the Way. The other goblin hits him. Josh goes down to 3. James gains 3 more life. That will be the turn. Does mean that Josh, if he wants to get rid of his Planeswalker, can have another dragon. He may have to. But can he survive? It's pretty close here.
Josh's list also plays with 1 main deck copy of Dragonlord Atarka. That would be very impressive if he get to this turn somehow.
And he'll plus Sarkhan. Hand is not good enough, so he's going to need another card. Draw a card and make a mana. Has to name the color when he activates it. Right when he draws the card, though.
Draw a card, then add.
Right.
So
you draw a card.
You get to see what you get first, and then add a mana as appropriate.
Card would be a lot more difficult if it was the other order.
Yeah, you typically want to design cards in such a way that when people have to make a decision, they have all the information that's pertinent. You don't want to order it the other way.
Makes a green mana, draws a card. Can he stabilize here? He's at 3. He doesn't have a way on board of getting Elspeth off the table. He'll go for Surrak Dragonclaw. And then it looks like play a tap land. Had to do that now, even though it has flash and can't be countered because he needed the mana off of Sarkhan. Now, what I do like about this is if he wants to, he can attack Rattleclaw Elspeth and kill it. Surrak does give the Rattleclaw trample.
Yep. It looks like Josh is just hanging back on defense.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I know it puts him to 1, but it's close.
Yeah.
Getting Elspeth off the table is a huge prize.
The only reason I think to do this is if Josh has Dragon Lord Atarka, or is playing to Dragon Lord Atarka, and is planning on taking care of everything next turn and just wants to keep himself alive and give him a shot to do that.
Yeah, but because Elspeth's around, 3 more soldiers are now on the board. Sometimes you forget about that ability on Dragonclaw as well. That your 2/1s have trample.
Yeah, particularly your 2/1s.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel like it's coming up a lot, but.
You see quite a lot of action, though, in James's hand. 2 Seeker of the Ways, Secure the Wastes, Negate, and Treasure Cruise. He has a lot more ways to fight here.
And James has to be a little bit worried from what he saw last turn. Why is he main phase? The main phase on Surrak implies that he has something to do with the mana. The fact that he didn't attack the Elspeth last turn when he could have gotten off the table implies that he has some other way to answer it next turn. Yeah, Josh's plays, if you're James, it's giving you a lot of pause.
Swings both his creatures, lets the Seeker of the Way get eaten by Surrak. Goblin token gets in and puts Josh down to 2. But it takes care of Rattleclaw Mystic.
And James would negate and secure the waste in hand, I think, is well served by just hanging back on defense. With Josh at 2, the mixture of those cards should make you safe.
You're going to have a lot of attackers next turn. It's unlikely Josh will deal with it. Here's Anger of the Gods to try to clean up everything. And to be honest, he's probably okay with that. He can negate it. He can also just let this happen and then secure the wastes.
Well, the problem is, what if Josh has a negate of his own?
Well, he could just secure for 3 and leave up 2 here.
Sure.
Surrak takes care of Elspeth. So yeah, if he secures for 3 and leaves up negate, I don't believe there's an out. You see Sarkhan making a dragon. And that's exactly what James is going to do. Makes 3 attackers, only 1 blocker on Josh means this is lethal. He'll have a negate up. Josh doesn't have 2 cards he can play off 2 mana, so this should be good enough. I like the line a lot here by James.
Yeah, this is a very safe way of doing it.
Here's 3 1/1s. 1 blocker, it's going to be a lethal attack. Untaps. Josh is at 2. Here's the swing. And that'll do it. No negate necessary. We are on to game 3.
Didn't even have to show the negate, though. It's somewhat implied there by James only securing there for a couple instead of the maximum amount, but got to hide that as well.
Remember, these players are building toward our invitational, our Season 2 invitational, and if you have not seen the invitationals, there's a lot going on. We had our first one of the season, a showdown between Reed Duke and Jacob Wilson, 2 of the top players in Magic. Eventually, it was Obzon Control and Jacob Wilson that ended up on top, and because of that, one of the prizes, as well as in addition to an invitation to the Players' Championship, is your own art on a token, and Jacob Wilson's is a good one at that. He chose the Monk token off Monastery Mentor. You see there his art featured on the token. You can now receive these limited edition invitational tokens. They are given to every entry to our 20K Open Series players, everyone in the main event this weekend, as well as those entering the 5K Premier IQs that we hold on day 2, or you can find in your area at StarCityGames.com. If it is hard for you to make it to one of those events, also, if you place an order from StarCityGames.com of at least $5, you'll receive one of these in the mail along with your Magic cards.
And this is available for a limited time only. Remember, we make one of these every time there's a new invitational winner. We're going to have an invitational in about a month in Columbus, Ohio. So if you want your Jacob Wilson Monk token, either sign up for one of our large events or place an order at StarCityGames.com today.
Yeah, illustrated by SCG's own Kristen Plesko. Definitely, these tokens almost all of them are home runs.
Not only that,
they're great.
I'm still blown away that this token got turned around within a week. We did the invitational in Richmond, and the following week, these were available. I have no idea how it got turned around that fast.
Well, we're into game 3, though. Teamer and Jeskai facing off here. And actually, it's great. Monastery Mentor has really seen an uptick in play since the creation of that token.
We have seen it a lot in Band Heroic decks. Ross Merriam winning in Cleveland last weekend, 2 in the main deck. And the list we've seen, I feel like 1 or 2 copies have been floating around in a lot of main decks. We've seen it in various Jeskai builds. We've seen it as a sideboard plan. We've seen it all over the place. Took a little while. I mean, the initial play that the card got did not match the hype. But recently, we've definitely seen an uptick.
We did see James take game 2 there, and it seemed like what was important is he was able to make it through the early game. We talked about there was a really key turn there where Josh had a 4-mana play on Thunderbreak Regent, and James was able to Valorous Stance it. It was just that James was able to basically not get too far behind on the board, and then the fact that his cards are very difficult to remove, that Josh doesn't have too much removal, and that James has cards like Treasure Cruise, those are able to carry him out.
James has a really potent late game, and he does have a fair amount of removal. It's just about weathering the storm of the initial turns. The edge that Josh has if the game gets later is his counter spells are very powerful. Temur Charm can affect some of the bigger plays, and Stubborn Denial is likely to counter a lot of James' stuff if Josh has any sort of board. So I think that Josh is favored very early on in the game because he can just bring a lot of power to mana onto the table early on. Later on in the game, his staying power is basically with the counter spells. But I think once you start getting to turn 5, turn 6, turn 7, James just has more flexibility, more card advantage, and should be a favorite, though no guarantee once the game gets to that stage.
Both players doing it here. Josh has been on 6 cards for the first 2 games. He'll get to be on the play, though. Important card. If I'm looking for Josh, I'm definitely looking for the Elvish Mystic. The ability to get out ahead at the beginning of the game is really important.
It is important, though it's worth noting with Temur's mana base the way that it is, Elvish Mystic does not always yield the most explosive draws because turn 2 Savage Knuckleblade requires very specific lands.
Yeah.
Even the turn 3 Thunderbreak region out of this deck requires very specific lands. So the Mystic is nice, but does not guarantee Josh suddenly becomes as explosive as, say, the mono green deck that we've had on camera.
Sure. Both players trade Tri-lands to start the game, so their mana color requirements taken care of. For Josh, it'll be a turn 2 Elvish Mystic into what looks to be a temple. So a slower start, building up toward a good turn 3 play. His mana now pristine.
Exactly. Now things like turn 3 Thunderbreak region, they're online.
See what James can keep pace with. For the Jeskai deck, these early turns are just about parrying blows. You know, can he trade Valorous Stance with Josh's cards? Can he maybe Disdainful Stroke a 4-drop? Can he do something that's relevant? He would hate to just not play anything here.
Exactly. The Valorous Stance there from James in game 2 was so critical. At that point, the board was clean, and James started to get to deploy his more expensive cards. That's really critical.
Here's Savage Knuckleblade. And haste. Does he have the stance for it? No, he does not. Swings in, and that's 4 damage. James down to 16.
So important for Josh that Knuckleblade was good there. If James has Valorous Stance and any sort of hand, the game could already spiral out of control. As it stands, James did nothing on the second turn. I believe maybe he's casting Anticipate, but Josh doesn't mind about that so much. And if James wants to untap him, cast Ascendancy next turn, he risks taking just a ton of damage. And we may see a repeat of the first game where James had the tools, but just not the time to deploy it all.
And I like the play from Josh. He may have had the option between Knuckleblade and some of his other threats, but while he played one that died to Valor Stance, the Knuckleblade haste play plays around Disdainful Stroke. So he's doing a great job of trying to make it so that James had no turn 2 play, and he ended up succeeding. James just didn't do anything here.
Valorous Stance gets him one way or the other, whether it's Thunderbreak Regent or Savage Knuckleblade, but one of those cards gets tagged by Disdainful Stroke and the other does not. So it's so good for Josh to be able to play around one of the cards. Now, as it stands, I think James had neither and was just going to anticipate on this turn, but still, Josh is trying to give the most opportunities for James to burn off that second turn. And that's the type of turn that Josh needs to be able to get out in front of James in a big way before James can deploy his big stuff.
And James's hand is powerful but slow and may just be not what he needs in the matchup. I believe he kept hand of lands and Anticipate and 2 Jeskai Ascendancies. It certainly sets up for a great late game, but it's going to be hard-pressed for him to not die before that happens.
Yeah, we may be looking at a repeat of game 1 where James's hand is not lacking power. It's just lacking ways to interact early and often enough. And if his play here is turn 3 Ascendancy, which it appears to be, Josh has free reign again this turn to make a big development.
Now, because he has 2 Ascendancies, James is going to use these Ascendancies to try to convert into just a pure control deck. So he'll take some hits this turn, but starting next turn, he'll be okay doing something like trading Valor Stance simply for an activation of Savage Knuckleblade. The amount of card advantage he can get from 2 Jeskai Ascendancies will allow him to throw away cards for life points if he needs to.
He may not have that kind of time, though. I mean, he's already 11, and Knuckleblade hits hard.
Knuckleblade hit, but no other plays from Josh. He's just going to protect Savage Knuckleblade. So at least, as far as that's concerned, that's somewhat of a win for James. The fact that Josh didn't mash more creatures into this board.
Possibly, though, if Josh is sitting on cards like Stubborn Denial and Temur Charm, it's still a lot of trouble.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be Ojutai Exemplars from James. That's an interesting one. Maybe not what you'd expect.
But again, this might be too slow now with Surak showing up to the party.
Yeah, I mean, turns out Josh did have something to play. It was an end-step Surak Dragonclaw. That with Savage Knuckleblade, that's lethal. These Ojita Exemplars are going to have to chump block.
Right.
Here's a swing. It's 10 power, and it can pump up to more. Exemplars will go in front of Savage Knuckleblade. That will force Josh to use his mana. Pumps it. Remember, the Knuckleblade has trample, so 2 tramples over plus 6. James down to 3.
Surak Dragonclaw just doing work.
Now, an interesting question. If Josh has a tap land here, which he does James have... He has end hostilities in his sideboard. If he just 5th land end hostilities here, he may be able to steal.
Exactly. Josh still could potentially have Separate Denial, but it is potentially a way to get back in this game.
Anticipate here, though. That's great news for Josh. Gerner will loot, finds a pain land. That's not what he needs. He'll go ahead and discard that.
And normally in spots like this, Jeskai Tokens is looking at things like Raise the Alarm and Hordeling Outburst to try to block and get an opportunity for it next turn. But with Surak Dragonclaw in play, granting trample, that's not an option for James.
That not being an option, I'm not sure he has anything he can do. And he does not. Josh Bower, 2-1, moves on with Teamer Midrange.
Great to see that deck in action. I know it's very popular. A lot of that has to do with when you have, 5 guilds or 5 wedges or 5 shards, the one that kind of sees the least amount of play, the most maligned one, does get to have a fan base as a result of that. But there's a lot of power in this wedge. It's picked up a lot of powerful cards over the course of the 3 sets. And Josh's deck, it's interesting to see because he's taking kind of a middle approach from the extreme beatdown Frostwalker builds of this deck to the Courser Caryatid builds. It is an aggressive deck, but it's playing with a lot of counter spells. It has some control over the game, and now at 10-2-1, might be one of the 8 decks we have in our top 8.